Welcome back to the program. Today we are joined by Colonel Douglas Macgregor, a decorated combat veteran, author, as well as the former advisor to the U.S. Secretary of Defense. So thank you very much for coming on. The possible war against Iran, it becomes a bit confusing. On one hand, we see this massive development or establishment of, concentration of military power. On the other hand, one could get the impression that Donald Trump, during his State of the Union speech, was walking back some of the hardest or strongest demands against the Iranians. I was wondering, how do you read the situation? Has there been a decision, you think, made to go to war?
Yes, I do. I think he recognizes that he has not much choice. We have to understand who put him into the White House and the enormous power and influence of the Israel lobby and the Zionist billionaires in the United States that contribute to it. I'm sure if you watched the State of the Union address, I'm sure that you saw that when it came to his comments on Iran, he received a standing ovation not only from his own party, but from the Democrats. So this demonstrates that the lobby owns the Congress and the White House. So under those circumstances, I think war with Iran is unavoidable. Now, people are wondering, well, why hasn't it already happened? I thought it would have happened somewhat sooner, but I think we have to understand that there are a number of problems that we're dealing with. First of all, you've only got two carrier battle groups. Normally, for an operation of this size against a country the size of Iran, you would have several. But the Navy is not in the best of condition right now. We have three more carrier battle groups that in the next couple of weeks could be readied for action, but they've got problems. They're not full strength. So one wonders whether or not we're going to wait that long for them. I don't know. I doubt it. I think the burden for this operation is going to be carried largely by the U.S. Air Force. The fleet will try to protect the Israelis, particularly the fleet that's up in the Mediterranean from incoming missiles. The fleet down in the Indian Ocean, I'm not sure how effective or, impactful that's going to be. One of the things that several of my friends have done, I have not sat down and gone through the process, but many other analysts have. And when you look at the hundreds of miles that we have to fly, either from land bases or sea base, that is from aircraft carriers, to deliver bombs and munitions and missiles and rockets and so forth, you're in a position where you've got to probably refuel on your way to the target area and then refuel again on your way back, because you're talking about hundreds of miles. So aircraft that on a good day can fly round trip 300 miles are now going to be asked to travel 700 miles or even 800 miles to reach the target area. And I'm not talking about necessarily penetrating the integrated air defenses in Iran, which this time I think will perform infinitely better than they did the last time, simply because the Russians and the Chinese have invested a great deal of expertise, time, and money in making them effective. So, yes, I think we're going to see a war, and the American people overwhelmingly, at least based on the polling data, are opposed to a war with Iran. Depending upon which poll you want to look at, it's 70%, 75%, almost 80% have said no. No more wars in the Middle East, period. No war anywhere as far as most Americans are concerned. But Americans do not control Congress. The Israel lobby does. And so when we talk about democracy, I think we ought to take a step back and look at the reality. It's not just the Israel lobby on this particular issue. Obviously, it's decisive. But many of the lobbies in Washington, D.C. spend a lot of money to sway votes in their favor. In the case of the Israel lobby, they say, well, we only spent $3+ million on lobbying. Well, that's true, but that doesn't include, basically over $100 million that is spent by the Zionist billionaires directly to get control of candidates. How do you do that? Well, you put money into their campaigns, into their political action committees, and you make it clear that if they don't vote the way you want them to, they'll support their opponents. Doesn't matter who the opponent is or what party he belongs to. In other words, do business as we tell you, and we'll get along just fine, and you'll get lots of money out of this, and we'll throw other good news in your direction. Because remember, these billionaires own most of the media. They're leaders in the financial community. They own Hollywood. That's not it. They probably control most of the legal profession. But the bottom line is they're in a position with the banks and the various corporations to put even more money in your pocket if you go along with them. So I'm afraid, at this point, it doesn't matter what the American people think or want. Their government is on a path to war with Iran.
Well, how do you think this war will be fought? Because you mentioned that a lot of these bombers have to fly a lot longer than what they usually would. But there's some reports of up to or more than 100 aerial refuelers to essentially assist in this what appears to be a massive buildup of both naval power and air power. So how do you think this can be fought? Because this won't be a limited war, and I think the Iranians ruled out the possibility of just a limited strike as well. So how do you see this war? Well, I know you're not part of the war planning on this one, but how do you think the war planning is being played out?
I don't know the various options that are being presented to President Trump. Politicians, as you know, historically always want to be a little bit pregnant. Most politicians don't want to bring the child to term. And by that, I mean they're looking for something short of what they fear most, which is all out war. And so I'm sure he's being presented with a couple of limited options because politicians like to signal as opposed to do anything. When we were moving towards the Kosovo air campaign back in 1998, the politicians in Brussels were floating ideas along the lines of, well, let's have a demonstration strike to show the Serbs that we're serious. And of course, this was ridiculous. You're going to fire cruise missiles at a target where there are no people, there's no installation to speak of, and tell everybody to look at the target and then watch an explosion. And they believed that this might avoid a bombing campaign against the Serbs. Of course, that eventually was thrown out. But they continued to try and tinker, and ultimately we miscalculated. I say we, I'm talking about Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, on the numbers of aircraft and munitions that would be required. And so the air campaign, instead of being over within 2 weeks, lasted 78 days. I think you have a similar phenomenon here. You're talking now not about 8 million people in Kosovo and Serbia. You're talking about 90 to 93 million people inside Iran, which is the size of Western Europe. And the population centers are now actively covered by various air defense systems. Now, will all these air defense systems work very well? I don't know. I would assume that they will do better than they did the last time. But the challenge for us, as I mentioned earlier, is twofold. First of all, you have to sustain yourself in a region where right now almost everyone is telling us to get out of their country. I mean, stop and consider this for a minute. Jordan is allowing us to occupy bases in the western part of the country, 2 of them. And there are large numbers of aircraft sitting on the ground there. Otherwise, we are largely dependent upon air bases outside of the region. That's a huge problem because instead of just flying back and forth within relatively close proximity to Iran, which is what we did last time, this time, as you pointed out, we're going hundreds of miles. Well, to do that, you have to have almost an inexhaustible supply of air refuelers, and these have to rotate. You've got to have air refuelers on station. Then you have to have air refuelers on their way and air refuelers on their way back so that they can be replenished and so forth. Right now, it looks like we're planning to operate in Iraqi airspace. Now, the Iraqis are not supporting us, and they're violently opposed to any war with Iran. I don't know what that means. Does that mean that we could face hostility from Iraq in that airspace? Are we constrained by it? I mean, people have been talking about Well, you could have attacks from the north in Iran, attacks from the south. Well, if you get out of the south, you're flying almost 1,000 miles to reach the targets that you're trying to hit. That's enormously difficult. Just recently, within the last 24 hours, a friend who's on the ground over there said, we're being forced to fall back on India as a place from which we could stage, refuel, rearm, and then fly back into action. Or you're forced into Africa, but even the African states like Egypt and Sudan are not supporting us in our war with Iran. Now, part of that is they never wanted to begin with, but I think also we have to point out that the comments made by Ambassador Huckabee in his interview with Tucker Carlson have had a very negative impact. People that live in the region are looking at the Greater Israel Project as an existential threat to them. So you put all of this together, then you look at the fact that you've got a Navy which is overstretched, overextended, and frankly, worn out and exhausted. The Ford Battle Group was down in the Caribbean for more than 6 months. I think they're looking at month 9, maybe 10 at sea. That's outrageous. That's just unacceptable. Now they've pulled into Suda Bay, which is in Crete, right off the coast of Greece, to deal with a lot of problems. Everybody's heard about their waste disposal problem, let's put it that way. But then you have the problem of once your ships have fired their missiles, where are they going to go to load new missiles? Do you steam all the way down to Diego Garcia? You can't use the Gulf, and historically, that's where we've reloaded. Do we go back to Italy, to Sicily, all the way to Naples? Do we go north into Greece? Probably into Greece, I suspect, to some extent. All of these issues I don't think were anticipated, and they're now being aired, and people are discussing how to deal with them. So while we have enough rockets and bombs and missiles on hand to destroy much of Iran, there's no question about that. How do you get them onto target? How do you get there? How do you get close enough to drop your munitions, to launch your missiles without putting yourself at risk? And we were drawing arcs, looked at the Shahab-2, which is a theater ballistic missile. That is a medium-range ballistic missile that the Iranians have developed. It's hypersonic. They have large numbers of these. And even the airstrips or air bases in western Jordan are within range. So, of course, is Israel, and so, of course, are ships in the Mediterranean. So we've got the advantage, I would argue, in air-to-air technology and surface-to-air technology in many ways, but we're dealing with the tyranny of distance. And the only people that can fly in and fly out and deliver their munitions easily, provided they're not shot down, but we don't think they can be targeted effectively, are the B-2 bombers and the B-52s eventually. But they fly at, 40,000 feet. Now, we're not sure. We don't think the Iranians can shoot them down, but we may discover we're wrong because we do see a lot of evidence that they can track them. If you can track something, as the Serbs demonstrated, you can shoot it down. So the bottom line is we have a lot of questions for which there aren't good answers. The Navy and the Air Force are working hard to deal with these issues and come up with solutions. But I think that's why you're beginning to hear rumblings in Washington from the military about its uncertainty as to the outcome of the air and missile campaign.